what I hope to do is give a pretty basic 101, but I'm also going to throw in some kind of neat things. There's a whole section of my presentation about best practices and things like that. So I think there's something kind of for everyone. So I'm just going to kind of jump in. It's going to be a little rapid fire at times. Other times, I'll slow down. Feel free to interrupt me until I say stop. I'm comfortable with taking stuff on the fly, but if it impedes us getting through stuff, I'm not afraid to say, hold that thought, okay? So I should just really quickly start and say who I am. But I'm Robby Astrove. I've lived in Atlanta for about 5 years, and I've been in love with trees for 3 times as long as that. I used to work I came to Atlanta about 6 or 7 years ago, or 5 years, well, whatever, and I started working at Trees Atlanta. And that was a really good introduction for me to understand the native forest and ecosystem here, and I'll talk about that. And then, I'll tell you the story, I started seeing this really awesome food network and system and movement happening in Atlanta. And I wanted in, but I was a shade maker, planting oak trees and things like that. So I'm making shade all day, and the gardeners, the people who want food, they're sun seekers, right? And so there was this immediate clash, and I thought about how am I going to work this out? And you guys don't know what Atlanta's little tagline is, but it's the city in the forest, right? Yeah. And we have more acreage, tree cover than any other city, and I thought maybe there's something to that, and I just thought about it, and I was like, ooh, fruit trees is the answer. It's providing canopy and food at the same time. Yeah. And there's so many more virtues to growing trees, and I started just getting more and more involved with fruit trees, and you'll see in the presentation, I'm pretty willing to plant anywhere, but specifically, it's going to have the best community benefit: parks, green spaces, schools, community centers, things like that. And there'll be more opportunities for me to share my personal story as we go. So I work for and represent a whole bunch of different groups that are all interested in this movement right now. That picture right there is at the back of Burgess Elementary School, which is in East Atlanta. That was my first school orchard in 2009. And what I found was no one was even planting fruit trees at school. Amongst this really great farm-to-school movement, they hadn't tackled perennial plants yet, or fruit trees. So that was taken this growing season. That's a quince that you're looking at right there. And everything's doing awesome. I've been really happy with everything there. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why trees are important. I really want folks to leave with that. Besides all the technical skills that you're going to get, I'm really hoping that everyone can become an advocate in this as well and learn why this is important, because you might have to explain yourself at some point, and you're going to know exactly what to say. And then I want to give you what you all came to get, is these tools. So the species that work, the best practices, different considerations to take into mind when you're doing design. And then I definitely want to spend some time outside doing, because we all learn best by doing, right? Okay. So this is an air photo from satellite from 72 Atlanta. All the green represents trees and plants. The dark spaces are impervious surfaces. This is central downtown Atlanta right there. Anyone want to take a stab at what that is? Yeah, it's Hartsfield. It's quite an impact, really, when you think about it. So I'm going to show you the sad sequence of what's been happening. We all know what it's going to look like. 78, 86, and pretty soon it turns. But the real message that I walk away is that trees are really important, okay? And this has been a little bit of time talking about this. Okay, so first and foremost, everyone knows that trees provide shade and clean air, and there's a lot of different ways to talk about the environmental benefits, but I'm actually really into the social and the economic benefits as well. And so trees are doing really great things like reducing noise and creating intimate spaces for us, reducing crime. How does that work? Well, when you come into a neighborhood that has nicely even street trees, it sends a visual and psychological message that, hey, our neighborhood, we have our shit together, and we don't want perpetrators here. And so it represents pride and a certain level of organization. And there's research that shows that neighborhoods with street trees actually have less crime. And of course, there's beautification involved. So it's really interesting to get into the psychology of trees. they inspire us, they're beautiful. There's lots of research coming out of public health now that people with views of nature from their hospital beds are leaving sooner. And of course, there's so many other things that we talk about. There are, more environmental benefits like cleaning water, mitigating flooding, obviously habitat. We all like birds and wildlife, so fruit trees and trees in general are going to help draw that in. Okay. And like I said earlier, the thing that's so important to me is they really promote community pride and bring people together. All right, next slide. So this is a typical picture of Atlanta, our urban forest here. And some of the characters that we might see are the oaks and the hickories, the beech trees, things in the understory, dogwoods. Then there's a whole forest floor. But and some of you may know this, but what today's really is about is seeing it through a whole other lens with food eyes. Okay? Because the forest has this organization of vertical that could be expressed with growing food as well. So that some of the things that you might want to plant, your high canopy will be like the black walnuts and the pecan trees, the nuts. But also persimmon figs, due to being quince, will get quite large. In the understory, you can have a combination of those same trees, or even dwarfed, but these are going to be a little smaller. The persimmons, the serviceberries, the pawpaws, the plums, the pears, and then of course the forest floor, which no fruit trees are going to grow on the floor, but you still have an opportunity to grow food. So with that in mind, I have this whole other slide that adds to that first slide about why these are important, but with fruit trees you get a whole other level of benefits. And it's the same thing, there's environmental, social, and economic. So the first thing is increasing biological diversity in gardens, and I was pleased to hear that everyone is already growing vegetable gardens. But when you bring fruit trees and berry bushes, you're bringing a whole other level of structure and diversity to your garden, which is good to attract beneficial insects to eat these insects that are eating our tomatoes and things like that. They're helping with seed dispersal and pollination and nutrients because of wildlife coming in. Bird poop is really good. Okay. Also, I found after leaving Trees Atlanta and doing fruit tree work exclusively for 3 years now, people don't really care about oak trees as much as they care about trees that produce food for them. Okay? So these fruit trees have the power to attract people to places. Just like the front of this building, you'll see there's a whole food forest in the front that when it's going to pop in another 4 or 5 years, everyone and their mom is going to be over there harvesting. Okay? The part that I like to do is include all of you, so this provides opportunity for hands-on education and learning. The thing that's really neat, I think, is Georgia has this incredible heritage of agriculture, so we're really just tapping into what we already know and do here. So this is a very kind of Georgian thing to do. It's part of our identity. I think that's important. The one thing that, if I have to sum all this up in one sentence, and this is really like the pitch of why fruit trees are so incredible, is that it's the best long-term, most sustainable, low-maintenance agricultural investment you can make. There's a lot there, but think about that. Food for decades with pretty little effort and investment. Case closed.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why they're my best friend, and I love them so much. Okay, and importantly, it's food access and food security for the community in abundance. We're not talking about a little carrot, no offense, gardeners, but I'll show you a picture of this pear tree that produced 500 something pounds from one tree. And that's nutrients, that's nourishment. And knowing that food travels, 1,500 miles or more to our plate, something fresh from a tree, you're gonna have the most antioxidant nutrient thing available to you right there. And it's road ready because it travels well. And again, case closed. Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna show you kind of what I've been doing in my little neck of the woods. This is all in like a half-a-mile area. There's like 6 or 7 orchards, all kind of bleeding from my house. But this is the fun part of my work, is that it's very community driven. So this is just in East Atlanta alone, everything I've been planting for the last couple of years. So the reason I'm showing you this, I'm going to walk through some case studies and show you some examples of the work in the community. And through that, we'll highlight some of the things that really work well here, and then we'll get into like the best practices after that. Cool. Next, please. So this is a little site I did in Grant Park. I'm sure many of you have driven past it. It's on Cherokee Ave. It was the old, it was a lookout point. That there used to be an old zoo that had the history of Grant Park. And there's a fountain here, and I use it as an opportunity to teach a workshop, kind of like what we're doing today. And I just want you to pay attention to my selection. So I put a fig in, I put both the American and Japanese persimmon, pawpaws, blueberries, pear. And then there was a whole really cool mixture of wildflowers, medicinal plants, things that attract insects, and also various heights. And so I really like doing, less than 10 choices, you've covered a lot of space. Also, things like, the persimmons are going to hit later in the season, whereas the elderberries will be first, and the pears and the figs in the middle. So I've kind of created a whole situation that makes a nice long harvest, and I'll talk more about that later. Okay? Again.
What was the toothache tree?
Yeah, I got it from Trees Atlanta. They would have it at their tree sale. It's something that we both need to look up more. But the reason it's called the toothache tree is some of the bark you can basically put in your gums and anesthetic. This is an orchard I did at the Cabin Memorial Park, and it was all covered with kudzu at one point. So the whole point of this was, we could be reclaiming green space with orchards. Okay, next please. That's the Burgess orchard that I showed earlier. It was really neat working with the kids because we just did one tree for every finger to help them remember, and we really were striving for diversity and kind of got funky with it too. I think you were talking about that. Like a jujube and some pawpaws. That's not really stuff that these kids are going to know about. Yeah, so that's again, it's part of the joy of this is we're expanding our horizon on food to eat and things like that. And it's neat to see all the chefs and the farmers market being integrated into this next. I forgot to mention, I did adapt this presentation a little bit. Normally I'm talking to teachers, so if it sounds like there's this, it's so community driven all the time, what works for them is going to work for you too. But through these examples, there's so many lessons learned, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. We can keep on going. So I want to start off and just talk about a couple species. The serviceberry, hands down, is probably my favorite. A couple reasons. Number one, it's native. And that's so important to be replanting things that belong here.
Is this a bush or a tree?
Good question. It can kind of be both. It's one of those things where is it a large shrub or a small tree? And so serviceberry is a wonderful 3-season tree. And by 3 seasons, I mean awesome flower pretty early. The reason it got its name serviceberry is it was back in WW1, there was a lot of death. And so they had to bury the soldiers, but the ground was frozen, right? So they had to wait for the ground to thaw. Well, when the serviceberry flower popped in the beginning of spring, it's kind of like the signal that the ground was ready, hence the name serviceberry. It's a serviceberry. I'm a geek. Okay, so 1, awesome flower. 2, delicious fruit. It's so good. And it's kind of like a little huckleberry, blueberry, cherry thing. Has anyone had them before?
I've ordered 2 of them for next week, so.
Cool. It's neat. And you can find them all over the city. And I'll talk about Concrete Jungle, my little foraging group that I help run, where you can actually get some. And then number 3, the reason I like it is it has awesome, smashing fall color. And so there's a couple of cultivars I'll let you know that I like a lot. The Autumn Brilliance is gorgeous, as is the Downy Serviceberry.
Can you cook with these 2 like you would with your coffee?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can do really neat things.
So I'm going to be happy with them then.
Yeah, including some cool alcoholic beer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's just one I just would love to see more, and I feel like it's underutilized and underappreciated in the nursery trade. So I've planted them all along my street for my neighbors and myself.
And what were the varieties you said?
The Autumn Brilliance, and then there's the Downy Serviceberry. The Spring Flurry is the other one I like a lot. And so just so you guys are clear, a cultivar means that it's been basically bred and crossed with other things for whatever reason. Sometimes it's the actual habit and form of the tree. Sometimes it's to bring out the quality of the fruit, like size, shape, sweetness, color, texture, all the above. So this is actually at Brown Middle School where we planted a food forest. Not just trees in a row, but again, what we talked about, varying heights, wildflowers, all together in the same space. And it's doing really, really well at the school. That's actually, the other slide was the multi-stem. So you get serviceberry as a straight trunk, and that's what I prefer on the street. So when you're not opening your car door, it kind of goes up. And the serviceberry shrub or the multi-trunk, I think is good for schools. And if you have space to let a bush out, other advantage is this means you're doing this lower instead of doing this higher. And we'll talk about the practicality of having things lower for harvesting later. Another one I like too is the American plum or a Chickasaw plum. Doesn't have the most incredible, people aren't wild about it, and it's a small plum, I guess. Bigger isn't always better, but again, I like it because it's native, and you're going to see I'm going to start all the native stuff first. That's my preference. But you can find them growing out in the wild, and you can get them at nurseries as well. The pawpaw, which we talked about earlier, North America's largest native fruit. Really interesting texture. It's like a banana, custardy, smoothie kind of thing. It's pretty elusive. I only had one last year, and definitely knew where to go and look for them. The raccoons get them first. But again, like I was saying earlier, here's a tree we could really tap into our heritage in not just Georgia, but North America. Lewis and Clark, the explorers, never would have made it to the West Coast if it wasn't for their Native American guides and this food source right here. Incredible amounts of vitamin C, by the way. And it's neat too because it looks very tropical-like, and that's different for us here in the temperate area. So sometimes I plant things purely on aesthetics as well. So it's nice to have a variety of things to look at, colors and shapes. So I kind of like the droopy, large, tropical-like nature of the pawpaw.
Pawpaws, you can't ship them, so if you have a pawpaw tree or you don't have pawpaws, they're just too fragile.
Yeah, little known fact, Colonel Sanders of KFC wanted to have pawpaw custard on his menu, but he couldn't because there wasn't enough production and it never would have, he's talking about a crazy chain, it's huge.
Yeah.
But you're right, unless you were getting it from a tree, probably not getting it at all. But they are delicious. I mean, it's like the prized fruit to eat. It really is. Next, please. Fig. So folks ask me all the time, Robby, what's the best thing to plant? And I usually have to say, what do you like? Because that really should dictate what you plant. But as far as ease and low maintenance and disease-free and tough as nails and maybe even 2 crops, you get a fall and a summer and a fall crop. That's your guy right there. And they grow to be big, so there's heavy, heavy fruit sets. So if you're talking about bang for the buck, figs where it's at. The other thing is, and this could help and hurt you, especially the small yard folks, is figs will be huge, but you can get dwarf varieties. Okay? And so that might be, actually I have a dwarf fig at my house.
Fig tree can grow 15 feet tall.
They can grow like 30, I don't think anyone's been to the goat farm.
I've
There's
got
monsters.
60 years old. They live forever, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, once one establishes, it's there forever, because I've got one that's 25 years old and it's well over 15 feet. And the cutting that it came off of was all the way up to top of the second story house.
Yeah. We're going to be planting figs today, and the folks at this place like marked the space they want. I actually had to call them and said, we're going to have to move it because the tree's in overpowered where you think you want it.
So when you said they're dwarf varieties, what is their average height?
It could be as small as 8 to 10 or 12 feet. The other thing to remember is none of this stuff is black and white. We're talking about nature, right? And we're talking about us modifying it. So think about maybe you put a tree in a container with less space for roots. That's going to automatically dwarf it right there. Or, or pruning. That's a way of reducing and modifying. Yes, please.
Robby, what about it's like a netting that goes, it's like an open air base. Instead of having a firm pot, it's just a cloth that wraps around. And then it's like air pruning. Can you comment on air pruning? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I'm familiar with nurseries actually growing trees in that medium, not like permanently doing it.
They
But-
seem to do fairly well, that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
As an alternative to just a firm pot.
Yeah, that's the concept I'm familiar with. I haven't heard of like it's going to live in an air pruned thing. So basically, what it does, think of a container like this, but now it has little slits and holes, and as the roots grow, they basically get severed off and cut off. So you're basically limiting the root volume capacity of that tree, and so that, of course, will limit the energy that it sends up. So that's a great way to have something in a container, which has pros and cons, and controlling the size of it. I haven't seen them commercially available, but I'm glad that they are, so I just learned something. But yeah, figs are awesome. That was the very first day of the East Atlanta Farmers Market in 2010. We have a tradition of planting fruit trees at the first day of market. Next, please. Japanese persimmon. I like the Americans more for taste, and because they're native, and I'm all about the natives. But Japanese persimmon is neat because I feel it's a little more hardier than the American. And then it also puts its fruit on in the fall. And personally, and it's changed for me that I kind of like the fall fruiting stuff more. I've been foraging pretty heavy for the last couple of years, and there's this magic week in September where there's so much available, and it's so good. The only outlier is, of course, the serviceberry, which is like a May, June harvest. But I like it because it happens later. And then what's neat is, and you can still, my friend who hasn't picked it, the fruit stays on the tree all the way until winter, until it just turns to mush. So ornamentally, it's just beautiful to have this globous orange fruit on your tree, and it's a beautiful, beautiful specimen of landscape tree. And of course, it's going to feed you too. The neat thing too, I should mention about the Asian persimmons, is that they're not astringent. So folks that have had persimmons, usually when I say persimmon, they make that face. Has anyone had the persimmons?
The green persimmons, that's it.
The American one, and kind of, right? Yeah. So those are kind of ready to eat, so to speak, at all times. And like I said earlier, my experience is they tend to do a little bit better in the urban environment.
Robby, been an old country guy, you don't eat persimmons until after the first frost.
Absolutely.
Because they go from bitter
Just like college.
to, you gotta fight possums for them.
Yeah. And that frost actually makes them sweeter, activates the sugars. 100%. Next, please. Pomegranate. A lot of folks are surprised to see me talk about pomegranate, but there's been a lot of interesting research over at Extension, and it's really promising in our area. It's a little finicky about where it wants to be. I'm really glad the fruit tree sale is happening after what just happened all last week, because I've seen pomegranates, like the roots will just get zapped by the coldness. It's the one, there's a couple things in here that you have to be a little careful about when it comes to cold hardiness of figs and pomegranates. But one way around that is be very intentional of where you plant it. Perhaps you plant on the south side of the building where the building is creating a whole bunch of heat. There's some basic permaculture design practices. The other thing that I've been experimenting with as well is planting rocks with the trees as thermal masses. And so, seriously folks, just a couple degrees difference on the ground is going to help keep the trees alive. Of course, heavy mulching is going to insulate as well. But I've seen so much success with pomegranate, and people always ask me too, like, what's going to produce fruit the first, like the fastest? Of course, the small berries, but year after year I see the pomegranates producing fruit the first or second year. And I don't know if that's because Ison's is providing older trees or not, but it's just an observation that I've made that fascinates me. And how awesome is it to have pomegranates fresh in Georgia?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
You're
please.
talking about planting the trees or whatever near a heat source or near the building so they don't like. Where I'm planning on planting my trees, I have a huge pasture in my front yard. There's no windbreak, and then we were gonna plant the trees along the pasture line. They're gonna get pelted with the wind. Is that a problem? Do I need to rethink where I'm gonna put them?
That's, I don't know if it'd be a problem. So again, guys, everything's gonna grow. It's really like, are we gonna get optimum production? And that's where these little kind of things come into play. They could very well be completely fine there, but without a windbreak and like strong wind, prevailing wind, that could be another stunting factor.
It's really, I mean, I could have a wind turbine up there and generate electricity for everybody, the way the wind comes across it. That's where I've had my vegetable garden in the past. I've had problems with not being able to grow stuff, with my
Yeah.
corn laying down, and
If it's full sun, I mean, that's a
it's
great
full
place.
sun.
Yes,
The new
It's tricky.
trees might need some anchoring in the wind to keep them straight.
Does it have a little slope to it?
No, well, not much, no.
I don't think it's gonna make it or break it. Before I forget, on the figs, I didn't give you the cultivars that I like. But Celeste, the LSU purple, are probably my favorites. Brown turkey will survive here. It's all right. And then there's like so many more, but those are the ones that tend to do best in our Zone 8 climate. And I'll just mention, Zone 8 is actually a really good zone because we can. We have a lot of diversity available to us. It truly, I never would have thought that being growing food in Atlanta was like this amazing, like Shangri-La place to do it, but it kind of is. Like really good 4-season growing here. All you vegetable farmers, you know that. Next, the pomegranate varieties that I like and recommend are the Wonderful. And then there's an Angel Red that does pretty well. And then there's a black, what is it called? I'll get it to you by the end of class, but there's another one that's actually a dwarf variety that's neat. I like the pomegranates because, like my comments on the persimmon, it's very ornamental, beautiful flower, and it has this really nice like, face shape to it.
Well, they self-pollinate, or do you need to have different?
They will self-pollinate.
I just planted some, so I have no idea what's going to happen.
In general rule of thumb is more varieties, better production, just to have that cross-pollination. But a lot of these things don't need, or I should say, they don't require having a partner. I will mention those that do for sure. Next, please. Quince and pear. So the pear is the tree in the back, and I'll start with that. But pear trees kind of become like one of my newer favorites because, to me, pear is a pear is a pear. But I've just seen them be so successful here, both in terms of being very tough, and they really produce heavy fruit loads. The one thing to know about pears, and the precautionary thing is they are very subject to disease, specifically fire blight. Okay, so when you're purchasing a pear tree, you want to make sure it's fire blight resistant. Okay, and some of those varieties that are fire blight resistant are Warren, Kiefer, Moonglow, and there's some others. The other thing about pear trees, I don't know if you can tell from that photo, we might see some outside here, things with pear, but they have this incredible tendency to grow very vertical, very columnar. And so, in the fruit world, more sun, more fun, okay? More fruit. So what happens is the trees are basically crowding out and shading itself. So what you want to try and do, and I'll explain this when we talk about pruning, is kind of help to open the canopy up and allow more sun to hit the branches. But the pears have this tendency, they grow like straight up. Like the one at my house, there's like 4 leaders, and they're only like this far apart. And so I've been trying really hard. I've even like tied the branches down to the ground and like pulled them out. And of course, skillful pruning will help direct the branches out as well. But just keep that in mind. But you can also play that to your advantage. I'm about to plant at a school, and the space was really tight. And I was thinking, well, you know what? Having a tree be like this will be really good to allow space to walk through instead of maybe a pomegranate or a fig that's going to be a big bush. So play it to your advantage, right? Next, please. The jujube, definitely the more freakish, different of the set here, but it's neat because it's different. It's kind of like a Chinese date. Unfortunately, it won't be available at the sale, but you can still get it, and it still is great for here. A friend of ours, Robert Hamilton, that some of you guys know, he makes this like jujube, like mulled wine, or he actually like dried them and made like a little candy out of it. So it's just like a neat thing. The other thing I really like about the jujube is it can be eaten almost in like 3 different stages. The first is this kind of really crisp, tart apple. Then it turns a little spotted and it gets a little sweeter, red. And then you just like let it sit on the tree and just let it sit until it looks totally ugly and uneatable. But that's when it's most delicious. And it's kind of like pruned and it's full of sugar. So that's just kind of a neat one. And that's at the school. So these kids are not only learn about fruit, but they might even learn about Asian culture and the origin of the tree. So that's the other thing that's neat about fruit trees is it allows us to connect culturally and culinary to other parts of the world and stories and recipes, and we can really get into that next week. So that's what the fruit looks like, pretty early on. So it's imagine like a small plum. And I should mention they do have thorns, but again, it can be played to your advantage. There's this community garden that I'm working at, that they're getting a lot of theft, unfortunately. And so we decided, so instead of putting an ugly fence that says stay out, we put all edible thorny plants up front. Yeah, so if you're going to steal from us, you're going to get plenty.
Are they stealing the fruits and vegetables, or they're stealing equipment? Fruits and vegetables.
Which is fine, and, well, depends who you are. But I'm actually promoting now that, especially if you're doing community stuff, that is you have, a front part that you're just going to say, this is where you're going to take and enjoy this, but please leave this part alone. So, and we all know there's plenty to go around, it really is. So that's just kind of a neat thing with the little spikes. We also did like some crazy Himalayan blackberries that have like the really nasty thorns, the jujube. I'm trying to think what.
Prickly pear was a good one, because those are like hard to see, but they linger.
Yeah, prickly pear. What's the third one we did? There was one more that had
We always stole plums from my neighbor's house growing up. I hate to think I'd have to whack through something like that to go steal a plum.
Yeah, it's rough. All right, next please. And there's more, okay? So plums, let's talk about that real quick. Plums are starting to kind of come higher in my ranking. You have to understand, I put all the native stuff first, like I mentioned, but the things that require a lot of chemicals and that are tough, the peaches, the nectarines, the plums, I didn't really start with those, but what I'm seeing now is that plums they're doing pretty good. But I think it also has to do with the variety selection. So the Methley, the Santa Rosa are 2 of my favorite.
Are these some, I don't remember what the ones are I ordered from the Atlanta Food Initiative, but those are native plants. I mean, those are some of the good ones.
Let me just deconstruct everything you're saying. Well, good is, I don't know what good means, but the plums that they're selling at the sale, these are all like the Asian plum. Any plum you get in the store is an Asian plum. The Chickasaw plum that I showed earlier, that's the only one that's native, but it's also like the smallest fruit.
Okay.
The ones that they're selling at the sale, and I meant to bring the catalog with me, they are selling the Methley and the Santa Rosa, and a couple ones that I haven't heard of, which I think will be good introductions. Really quick plug for UGA Extension. I usually have the pamphlets with me, but they have been doing research for many, many years, and they are doing trials and experimenting, and so there's lists, and a lot of what I'm telling you is coming off those lists that are saying these are the best varieties to be planting and growing in Georgia in the South, because these are dealing well with our humidity, with our chill hour requirements, insects, things like that.
And that's accessible through the UGA website?
Yep, if you just do like UGA Home Fruit Series in a Google, you'll get it.
Okay.
But the beautiful thing about the Alfie fruit tree sales, we've done all that hard part for you. We're just selling the stuff that's you
It's
know,
tried and true.
tried and true, exactly. But I really like, just looking back, 4 or 5 years of the plums and the mature plums. There's 2 plum trees in Kevlar Park, right by the basketball courts, that are awesome, heavy fruit sitting, and they're delicious. Really, the first time, it sounds nuts, but like, I'm like, into my 30s, and it wasn't until a couple years ago that I really felt like this is what a plum is supposed to taste like.
That's why we stole them.
What was you said Santa Rosa, and what was the other one?
Methley. Quince is not going to be available, but it's good for our region. I like it because it's a fall producing. The variety that's really neat in our area is orange. This variety is called orange. Those of you that know about quince, you really got to cook it down. You can't eat it fresh. Cherry is mostly grown up north, but there is a Stella cherry which could be grown down here. And the reason the Stella is neat is because it is self-pollinating. And so, like I was saying earlier, I have this really tiny yard, and knowing that space was limited, I kind of started with the trees that were self-pollinating, so I would only plant 1 and not 2. But I also did a little experiment. It's kind of funny. I don't say my house is maxed out, but I kind of ran out of room. So now I'm actually planting my neighbors' yards. But they like it. And so what I did was I planted 2 trees in one hole. And I pruned one. I just cut off one side like this, and I planted another one and I cut off this side, so it was like this. And so the advantage is you've eliminated space that you need. You're putting 2 trees that need to be pollinated directly to each other, and you're extending your harvest, because this is going to hit, and then like 2 or 3 weeks later, this is going to hit. So that was like really good right there. And so those are the kind of things I'm figuring out, experimenting with, and I definitely encourage everyone to experiment, because what works and doesn't work at my house might work and not work at your house. So there's a really fun exploratory aspect of this work. So jump in.
Have you heard of a variety called Montmorency cherry supposed to do well down here?
I'm not super familiar with cherries,
Okay.
and I'm not going to mislead you with any talk.
Stella cherry is what I have, and it's sweet.
Okay.
Does well. The Methley plum is also very easy.
Yeah, and the Stella grows fast. I was actually up on my roof cleaning my gutters out, and the Stella cherry that I planted 3 years ago, it's higher than my house. It's like really crazy.
And you can eat them fresh off the tree, they're sweet enough to.
Sure.
Okay.
A Stella, yes. There are sour cherry varieties.
Right, okay.
Let's talk about apples, because anyone knows about North Georgia, that's the apple capital of our state. And so apples do really well, typically in cooler environments, but what you need to know about apples is in most fruit trees, they require a certain amount of chill hours. That's a certain temperature below 40 degrees to kind of start the fruiting cycle, is the layman's way to explain it. It's more technical, of course. But what you need to look for apples especially is low chill hour apples. These are apples basically for the South, okay? And so the Golden Dorset and the Anna are 2 that are really good. Those are like the lowest chill apples, but you can also grow Fuji and Wine Sap and a whole bunch of others. The most important thing to know about apples is you have to have a pollinator. You've got to have 2 of y'all. Furthermore, they're coded based on their flowering time, so you need to get the matching partner. And again, those UGA guides that I explained earlier, they're going to have the code, and I wish I brought it, because it shows it all, lays it all out. When you come to the fruit tree sale, you'll have that information. And in fact, this year they did such a better job as putting the trees together that work together to ensure success for the customer.
So, we planted an apple tree, and the person who got it said it had 4 different types of
Yeah.
apples grafted onto it.
Mm-hmm.
So we only put in that one. I have no idea even what they are.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, they have reacted differently with different bugs and, you know, different, like I'll see damage on the leaves, but I don't know what they are. And,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, if you have like super small space, I think it's a good idea. I'm not super into it, it's kind of like too Frankenstein-y for me. But it's still neat and a great way to, I think, great educational thing. And I mean, you're gonna have 4 different types of apples for one tree, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So-
I've got one and it doesn't do very well.
Oh, really?
I think,
Good to know.
it's,
Frankenstein.
yeah, just like when you like, you know, overbreed a dog is a problem. It's like too much human beings involved in a tree.
Yeah.
We're gonna mess it up somehow.
When it's grafted, does it become self-pollinating, or you still need something else?
That's a good question. I think you no longer need to have the multiple, because you're basically putting 4 different types of species on one, so the flowers in that 20-foot area of the tree are all gonna help each other. Muscadines, I can't talk more highly about. I think they're great. It's the one plant that you see and you know you're in the South. Okay.
When do you prune them? When do you cut them back? I know it's got an overgrown one in your backyard.
Generally, all pruning should be done right now. Right, kind of
No, next week.
between the hardest winter and spring. You don't want to do it when the flowers are out. That's where most of the pruning activity happens. You can do some pruning in summer, but only a certain type, and I'll talk about that
And I'm gonna
outside.
cut them down pretty low. I mean, these are very old muscadines, and they're all completely overdone, haven't had any care, so it's not gonna hurt them, just a.
Well, muscadines, you want to do some homework because you got the main vine, but then there's like offshoots, and so you don't want to really damage the trunk of it.
Find it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to find it. I mean, you're gonna have, and then you count like 2 or 3 nodes from that. There's a science to this, y'all.
I'll get
So,
on the internet then.
Yeah, please do your homework. Kiwis is kind of neat. Again, it's a vine like a muscadine. Nothing like the New Zealand kiwis, but they're a little smaller and delicious. I did one at my house. I have yet to see fruit on it. I'm still kind of training it on the trellis. Both the muscadines and kiwi need to have some type of support, either natural or homemade. I actually had this tree in my yard debating killing and cutting down, or just removing, and then I thought, well, it might be more valuable to me dead and standing, so I planted kiwis and passion vine at the bottom of it, and it's just like crawling up it. Now I have like maypops and stuff that just like sprinkle down when I walk by. It's kind of neat.
Are you familiar with kiwi berries?
No. Elderberry is another high-ranking tree to me. It's native, it's beautiful, very medicinal. Elderberry wine. So it's just a nice something to add into the mix. It does kind of come in early. So mulberries, they're everywhere. I don't know too much about the nuts, but they're available. I like the raspberries a lot for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's kind of like instant gratification. They hit right away. And the heritage variety, which I believe they'll have available at the sale, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. They just have little babies and shoots and they'll just keep on going. And my experience as well, like fig, is you can actually sometimes have 2 harvests in 1 year. You can have a fall, a summer and a fall.
The ones I planted that I got last year, they did a 2 fruiting.
Yeah.
So, and they spread, so I wasn't asking on now, but how to trim that back.
Yeah, you can trim them, or you can even carefully dig them up, and so that's kind of what I've done is, I remember I planted one like this big, and I was like, oh, it's not gonna make it, and it went crazy. So, and that was already like 2nd or 3rd generation. So I'm taking like babies from babies from babies, and that's my Christmas gift, by the way. I give away raspberries.
So you can do that, you can dig them up, plant them.
Yeah.
You ever think
Was it
branches
shut up?
down, put dirt on them and grow them that way?
I haven't, but that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. a lot of species, if the branches will actually touch the ground, they'll reroot. Fig does that as well. We're not going to be covered. I'm not going to touch the berries too much for interest of time, and just talk quickly about the pineapple guava and why it's special, and why this is special. Anyone notice what's a little different about this right now, this time of year?
It's green.
Yeah, okay. This is a loquat, and like the pineapple guava, it's evergreen. And that's kind of neat because, let's say there's a really ugly neighbor house that you want to cover up. Well, you can cover it up with food now. It's also going to provide, windbreak, and also importantly, cover for wildlife, like good native habitat. They suggest having water, structure, but also evergreen plants as a place for birds to come and nest and stuff like that. So that's kind of neat as well. And
How big does it get?
which one?
The
Pineapple?
pineapple guava?
Loquat.
Okay, I'll do both. The loquat gets quite big, and what I try to do all the time, I always search town for mature trees so I can get it in my head what the final product's gonna look like. But a buddy of mine's got this loquat that's like 15 by 15 feet. It's this huge ball. It's pretty big, and they have a nice heavy fruit set.
What is the fruit like?
Has anyone else had a loquat in here? Yeah.
It's delicious. It's orange and juicy, a little tart.
Maybe
It's your ones.
the leaf almost looks like chestnut.
Isn't it called the Japanese plum as well?
I don't know for sure. It might
I
be.
think so.
But the neat thing about loquat as well is it's harvest somewhat earlier in the season. So the reason I'm mentioning like the early, mid, late is that should all be considerations for planting. Because ideally we want to be harvesting and eating something from May, June all the way up until December. There was prickly pear tuna fruit that was available up until December this year. So that's pretty impressive. So notice how I separated peach and nectarine? Hater. It's really hard to talk about peaches in here because we're the peach state and everyone loves peaches. They're so good. And Pearson's Farms peaches are amazing, and who won't have those at your house? But they're really difficult to grow without chemicals.
Yeah.
And there's ways to do it. For me, I just say I'm not going to bother and invest in the things that have more benefit to the world, like the native stuff. But I will say, every year, and the number gets higher and higher, I eat more peaches. It's because of Pearson.
Yeah.
You see me there.
I buy by the case.
I get cases, and we'll just pop like 5 or 6 in one sitting.
Not like fruit.
We made some nice preserves out of this year.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the possibilities. Did I miss anything for y'all?
How about the pineapple guava?
Yeah. All right. So the pineapple guava is the other evergreen one. I was teaching a class at Atlanta Botanical Gardens a couple months ago. And it's neat because they have it in 2 different places. One is like kind of grown like a tree. It was quite beautiful, evergreen. But then they had one that they basically had planted as a hedgerow, and they had like a lot planted together, and you could see that every year they'd come and but it was this beautiful green hedge that now is food producing. So it kind of causes this, us to think differently about all of our choices when we're doing landscaping. To really start doing more food forests and foodscaping is what I call it. But it's they're really delicious. They're different. Like the pawpaw, it definitely has a more tropical appearance and taste. So for the culinary, it's a neat little outlier to have that possibility to do here. Yes, please.
What trees are happiest in, well, none of them are happiest in containers, but if you were going to have them in a container, which ones would do the best?
Yeah, great question. I would think that more the smaller materials, because the larger canopy, trees, fig, well, let me start by saying anything dwarf is great for a container. Then beyond that, the best thing when you're talking about design is like if you know the tree and the final height and width is, that's going to determine a lot for you. But all the berries I think are good for containers. I think the serviceberry will probably work in a container because it's native and you can take it. Elderberry is probably good in a container. But you know what? You could do apples and plums as well. The apples will require a little more work because it's going to want to grow so much faster. But the plum probably can be modified. And remember, by virtue of you putting it in a container, you're automatically dwarfing it. If that makes sense to y'all, because it's limited by nutrients and space and soil.
The nut trees,
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about those?
You know, I'm not super familiar with the nut trees. I'm putting it up here because this is what we can do. I haven't planted many. I haven't harvested many. The one tree that I'm somewhat familiar with, maybe you can talk about too, is the chestnuts. The Chinese chestnut is kind of all over town, and they grow to be huge, but those are delicious.
I planted a chestnut and I lost it. And then I found an almond, but it hasn't produced, and it's only been 4 or 5 years, and they take longer. One, you asked about are there other areas to cover. I'm not sure what you meant by that, but I thought amendments to the ground should be covered. I think that's probably the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But one issue I learned when I was doing the orchard was that there are fungal amendments, and then there are bacterial amendments.
Mm-hmm.
And trees like your bushes, like your berries, and then your larger fruit trees, anything woody requires a fungal environment or amendment added to the soil. While gardens, a lot of people who are gardeners, that's more bacterial. So what I use for fungal is worm castings for my trees. And you can dump a bag around the tree, radius of the tree, as far as the brow, goes of the branches. But I actually drill holes about 18 inches into the ground, north, south, east, and west of the trunk, and put the worm castings in the hole.
That's great. I'm going to talk a little bit about the amendment stuff outside when we're planting, that's to be more relevant, but for the most part, I'm hands off. Can you pick up that book right there?
On the almonds and the hazelnuts, I'm growing those. Hazelnut looks more like a bush. I've never seen them grow a tree. Do they get bigger than that?
What does it say? I can't read it.
It's the Holistic Orchard, Fruit Trees and Berries, the Biological Way by Michael Phillips.
I love Michael's book because he talks about a lot of all natural, organic amendments. He's really into sprays, worm castings, and compost tea. I really wasn't prepared to talk a lot about that, but he's a great reference for that. Let's move on. I still have a lot of stuff.
Just a quick question. The goji berries, I've been eating them for years. They're tiny little raisin little things. I stopped eating them years ago. How do they taste? Does anybody know how they taste without them being shriveled down to nothing?
I don't. I've never had a fresh one.
Anybody here?
Fresh what?
Fresh goji berries.
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't.
You can hydrate them. I put them in my kombucha so you can get an idea of what they would look and feel.
It's interesting, nobody though has had any alpha.
They're not native, they don't typically, you wouldn't.
I have one at my house. I just planted it and it flowered. No fruit, but maybe in another year or two, I'll call you and try one.
Well, that was my next question, follow-up question to that. Where can we, this is wonderful, where can we sample these? Is there an organization or group, perhaps, that we can, on a monthly basis, like, try some of this?
The best thing I could offer up is there is an Atlanta fruit club, kind of. Robert Hamilton is a major player in that. He's the other big fruit guy in town, and in his house is this like crazy, incredible jungle of food. During the growing season, and there's also groups like NAFEX, the North American Fruit Explorer Group, that have conferences, and so there's always food swaps associated with this. I think there's a Southeast group. In my resources that I'll show, I have that information for you, so I'll get back to that. Let's keep it moving. All right.
One thing you left off the list is scuppernines.
Oh, yes. That would be That's like a cousin of the muscadine. If the muscadine is the darker berry, the scuppernong is the more kind of champagne green one. And they harvest usually about 2 weeks later, but that is another excellent choice.
2 to 4 weeks. And the pecan trees, if you're planning on planting a pecan tree, don't expect fruit off of it for at least 10 years.
Yeah, that's true.
10 to 15 years is first harvest.
And then it's gonna depend on when it rains and when it doesn't rain.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see where we are. So yeah, this one pear tree in Dunwoody, it was 567 pounds of. And so I just kind of ended with this because this is kind of what we all hope to happen. Okay, but I'll just quickly talk. We kind of go through this, but this is a Concrete Jungle, the foraging group that I work with. But we harvested since 2009 over 15,000 pounds of fruit that gets donated to shelters and food banks. So that's just kind of like what we do, and that's that's like a typical day for us is going around the city and rescuing food that would otherwise go to waste. That's our map of Atlanta. So it's out there. A lot of this is public actually. Some of it is on private lands. We of course get their permission, but if those of you that do have fruit, if you ever have access and don't want it to go to waste, you can contact Concrete Jungle. Next slide, please. This is their donation statistics. But there's something really neat about Concrete Jungle, and the takeaway for me is that these fruit trees in urban areas, they're productive. And you have to remember, the Concrete Jungle trees, no one cares for those. They're just out in the world, not being fertilized, not being pruned, not being cared for. They're forgotten. But yet there is abundance. And now we're going to put so much love into our tree, so you can't go wrong. And so I've been actually working a lot with the city of Atlanta to kind of amend some of the zoning ordinances and change so we can have more public fruit trees. They're very anti-fruit trees for the mess they create, but Concrete Jungle is the solution to the mess. So that's how I'm promoting it to them. So next slide, please. All right, this is kind of what we came for. I'm going to run through these. This is like the golden nuggets of success here. So when you're going about your business, plan it out, okay? When I moved into my house, I didn't plant anything for a whole year because I was watching the shadows. I actually left little bamboo stakes in the ground. I was pretty scientific about it. I got into it. So, take your time, don't rush, seek partners, consult, get more education. I'm glad that you're here. Don't let this be the last thing. Always plant during the planting season. When you're planting trees, you want to plant from October and no later than March 15th. You have to watch when things start to bud out. And then you have to know where you are, your hardiness zones. Folks in North Alpharetta and all that stuff, they might have to do little things differently than folks south of the city. Actually, it's a whole different zone. You go from 8 to 7, basically. In the tree world, there's this mantra of right tree, right place. That kind of has to do with what I spoke about earlier, about knowing the final size, width, shape of your tree. If your tree is going to be a monster tree, don't plant it under power lines. But you know that service area that I talked about? I did it in a little strip of my street because it's going to stay small. It's the single trunk. It was an appropriate tree for that space. Okay. Please buy from local nurseries like Tyson's. I'm sorry if anyone here works or has family that works for Home Depot and the big box. Don't buy their crap. What happens is some apple farmer in Michigan has to unload all his trees and it gets sent on a truck to the south, and those trees are the higher chill hour varieties that just don't do as well. The trees that you're buying from a Georgia-grown nursery are adapted for our climate and region, and you will have the most success. Kind of like everything that you're going to be available to sale, it's already hooked up.
How do you spell that? Isons?
IISONS.
You mentioned the sale, Robby. Where do we find that information?
It's all right in front of you. This is the incredible edible grow-it-yourself fruit tree and edible berry bush sale. Next Saturday at North DeKalb Mall. Everyone will be there.
Just another local nursery is Willis Orchards.
Yeah, they're great. They're very great too. There's several more. I think I have a slide about local nurseries.
What does this mean, site trees to the north?
Yeah, okay. So this is be good for you garden folks. Because we're in the northern hemisphere, the sun generally tracks to the south in the sky. So if you can plant your fruit trees north of your vegetable beds, they're less likely going to put shade on your food. So at my house, I basically have stacked all the trees to the north side of my property, and it's progressively getting smaller and smaller and smaller because I'm trying to fit as much stuff as I can in a small area and give everything as much sun as possible. So there's some design considerations about putting your fruit trees to the north, knowing that they're going to get big. Okay? We want sun, right? We talked a little about disease-resistant varieties, mostly for pears. Some apples will get fire blight as well. The most important thing to do, especially, is to have clean tools when you're cutting it off. Okay. Research pollination needs and chill hours. I kind of talked about that, but don't just buy something willy-nilly. Understand what you're getting, and if it requires a partner, do that. We'll talk more about this outside, but $1 million hole for a dollar tree. Heavy investment on getting the hole damn perfect, and then planting properly for the tree that costs $1, because that will make all the difference in the world. I've seen it a million times. I've seen bad holes and trees die in it. I talked about mulch earlier. Just when you think you're done, put more. There's no such thing as too much mulch. And usually it's free. It's the best thing. It will break down nutrients. It's adding air spaces and all the microorganisms that are going to be living. It's actually burrowing down, creating air pockets. They're pooing. It's amazing. You can't do enough of it. Definitely have a water plan for what you're doing. And if you can, if possible, plant the things that are like requirements together, that's going to make care easier. Also, whenever I do a planting, the first question is, where's that hose spigot or where's that rain barrel? Make it easy on yourselves. Put a little bit of forward thought into this. Learn to prune. It's definitely a must. We're going to get into it a little bit today, but it's taken me a little while to really figure it out. But you're your best teacher, so we'll practice. Hopefully you'll practice what you learned today, and you'll check back in it next season, and see, did the pruning, what your action give you the desired result that you want. But with pruning, it's an art and it's a science. So that is a whole class on itself, really. Just like we're doing and I've been promoting, definitely keep learning about this stuff. I know I am all the time. And at least today, you'll learn how to plant. Teach someone how to plant properly. That's a really good life skill that people can have. Like I said, the trees are going to teach you. And then, if you're doing good and having success, share your story, just like we kind of did today. I'm up here in a teacher role, but I'm already learning from you guys, and we all have something to, so share with each other. That's why I mentioned that Atlanta Fruits Club. I think all of us would probably enjoy just kind of being on that listserv. And it's a really neat community of people with questions and answers, and what do you got? What do you got? I should mention, the same day of the fruit tree sale at the Wild Center and where the Oakhurst Community Garden is, there's going to be an awesome seed swap. And I believe they're also going to be swapping scion, which is the for grafting. Start small, and once you've got it rolling, do more. Next, please. I don't know if there's anything really here for us. This is more just for the community groups. I think a lot of this I've talked about, experimenting. One thing I definitely want to touch upon is thinning fruit. It's kind of counterintuitive. Imagine that you planted something 3 years ago, you're really excited, and the fruit's going to come, you know what I'm saying? Take it off. Thin it. Remove it. What you're doing, there's different, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but you can just nip all the flowers off if you want. I would just wait till it gets started. There's a couple of reasons why. For blueberries especially, you definitely want to remove, you just bought blueberry at the Healthy Fruit Tree sale. if you happen to get blueberries, take them off. Why? It's a very young tree, and in the long term, you want to have that energy invested in the root system. And going for growth, it takes a lot of energy to create fruit. So you're basically saying, all right, tree, I want you to grow, I want you to be strong before you put fruit on. The thing, and this is kind of applicable to you guys, is especially for these mature trees and trees that are already setting fruit, these trees are just programmed to set fruit. That's what they do. And in fact, so much fruit can be damaging to the tree. It can be breaking branches, and then it's kind of like a quality versus quantity thing. I like having, maybe not as many peaches, but at least they're all going to have some meat on it. The other reason is that the fruit clusters are pretty tight together. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick off the flowers that are closest together and basically leave room for the trees, the fruit to grow. Outside this might make a little more sense. But there's this, you have to thin and prune your trees.
So if you have, just a quick question on the blueberries, like, because they did fruit that first year, then pick them as they come out green? Or
Yeah.
take the flowers off? What about the second year?
It's all kind of like you're comfortable. My feeling is I like to have the flowers hit because they're pretty, and then the bees hit it. And then so when the fruit just starts, you can just kind of pinch it off.
Okay.
So.
You would do that the second year also?
Depending on how happy you're with your growth,
Okay.
maybe. Next. Right tree, right place. This is the mantra. Okay. We'll definitely do this outside a little bit, but I think we'll learn it better here. But basically, look up, look down, look all around. Okay. You're looking up because you want to get sun. If you're in the 5-hour plus range, you're actually doing pretty good. I know there's a question earlier about things that will do well in low light. Anything native is going to always do well. Chickasaw plum, serviceberry, they're native. They're usually growing in the forest, so that's kind of like where their home is. And then you also want to be aware about canopy space. That tree's going to grow up and out. I know at my house, it's kind of a good thing, it's kind of a bad thing, but I planted some trees to the north side of my house, and so they're starting to actually, it's phototropism, the trees that grow towards light. So depending on where you plant it, your tree might want to do the sideways business because it's reaching for the light. So better off, if you can, push the tree out a little bit more and allow for full sun instead of just partial sun. But trees will bend to light. But knowing the ultimate canopy width is going to go a long way in choosing your site. You're looking down because you want to evaluate the growing space, both in quality and volume. Trees don't want it too wet, and they don't want it too dry either. You're looking at topography because I know there's a question earlier about slope, and that's important because there's airflow. Cold air is more dense air, and so it will actually collect in lower valleys and sometimes even zap our trees or stunted. I've seen trees more out in nature, but when you're walking down a hill, the trees just get smaller and scragglier as it's frost is what I was experiencing.
I have a quick question about soil. Our backyard where our garden is, our vegetable garden, is completely organic. Unfortunately, our front lawn had not been, which probably isn't the best place to plant anyway, but how long should we wait to plant food-producing trees in a yard that was previously sprayed?
I don't know. I'm trying to know more about that stuff and pathogens and heavy metals in trees. Again, the concrete, we're picking stuff out of the middle of nowhere. I don't know what the hell happened in the ground before, so I don't really have anything to offer you. But it's something I'm interested in learning more about.
Depends on what it was sprayed. One, it depends on what it was sprayed with. Two, it depends on how much has been put onto it.
Yeah.
Generally, at least 2 years.
Yeah, it really depends on the half-life of the chemical and if it's going to stick, in the plant tissue or not. Let's keep on moving. That's just kind of showing you the importance of knowing shapes and sizes and appropriate places to plant. Next slide. I really want to get us outside. The only thing that's important about this is most of the trees from the alpha imagery sale are only bare root. We'll talk about that outside. But stuff in container, when you're buying a tree, you're not really buying this part of it. What you're buying is this part of it, okay? And so sometimes trees look like that when you pull it out of a container. So it's really, really root bound. And so next time you go to a nursery, take the tree out of the container and you'll really impress the nurseryman. And they'll be like, oh wow, this person really knows what they're doing. And you want to avoid something that's been like really, really root bound, okay? And then these are just like other considerations, you know, deciduous and evergreen, how fast and how long it takes for it to reach full maturity, does it have healthy roots? These are good questions to ask when making purchases and planning out your orchard next. We talked about the harvesting zones, show hours, pollination. I think we're looking good. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, all shapes and all sizes. Yes, next. We'll do that outside. The reason I put all this other stuff that I'm skipping over is I'll probably provide copies. So you guys can actually have this presentation because there's a lot of information in it. So I want that to be a resource for all of you. Keep on going. Keep on going. Keep on going. Keep on going. I'll just talk about this and we'll do a little bit outside hopefully, but the whole point of pruning is you're pruning for structure and architecture. Trees grow fast and they get leggy and they will not support the heavy fruit weight. So what you're doing is you're training your tree to support heavy fruit. You're also training it to allow more sun and air into the canopy. Okay? 3 things that you can always prune. Anything dead, anything broken, and diseased. The other thing is these little suckers. You know what I mean by the sucker growth? So that's just kind of like noise. You can get rid of that. Always have sharp, clean tools. I carry alcohol swabs with me and I clean it. That's the worst way to spread diseases right there. I'll talk about the central leader versus open center outside next. Yeah, I mentioned, I'll just say it again, but having something smaller is actually a little more manageable than having something bigger. Because at the end of the day, it's all about this and this. And so it's a lot easier to do it like this than to be on a ladder all crazy. And the rest I kind of talked about. Okay, next. Great, so these are some of my favorite resources. I'm not going to get into it because you'll have this, but a lot of the books that are on the table here are some of my favorite ones. Who's got the Fruits of Uncommon Worthy of Attention book? Yes, that's fascinating read. I like it because it includes a lot of historical and cultural information, and it's like just like the funky stuff that was here 100 years ago that is not. I mentioned that book. This style book that you're reading is fantastic. It's just like features 75 fruits. Are we seeing why this is such a good idea, everybody? Okay. So I'm just going to hand out one last resource and then we're going to get outside. But this is something that's available on the web as well, but I'm just going to give it to you. And I put together basically like package deals. And it is kind of, one's going to go this way and one's going to go this way. It was created for schools, but I feel like anyone growing fruit would be fine. And so I basically explained stuff, why you might want to have certain things paired together. Like for example, if you just had to do 3 trees, I'm going to say do a Japanese persimmon, do a fig, and do a serviceberry. You have a spring, you have a summer, and you have a fall. And they're all really good and hardy and 2 out of 3 are native. So I also talked about the fence orchard. So if you have, like that example I said about having this tree that you just wanted to cut down, or this empty fence, well that's perfect for a kiwi or a muscadine. So I'm really big into utilizing existing architecture. So those are just some recommendations that I think are kind of fun. So you have that. I'm just going to leave this up while we close out and make the transition to move outside. But there's my contact information. There's my email. I'm always available to talk to you guys further I'm also available to professionally, come to you for other services. I do home consultations and stuff like that. So if you need to reach out to me for any help, please do. This is kind of my pride and joy. It has been for a couple of years now. I'm going to be planting, close to 12 orchards in the next 3-4 weeks at schools and community gardens and stuff. So I really look forward to this workshop and this time of year. I'll just give you my card too if you guys want it.